I still remember the sound of the notification, that faint little ding that used to mean comfort. But that day it felt like a blade. It was a message from my bank. Your balance has dropped below the set limit. At first I thought it was a glitch. I blinked at the phone, half smiling, half frowning, like the message would disappear if I just looked long enough. But it didn't. And neither did the ache that started forming in my chest. I had never told anyone about that account. It was mine, my secret. The one thing I built after years of saving, years of quiet sacrifices and saying, maybe next time, whenever I wanted something nice. My sister Grace used to joke that I was the family banker. She'd tease me about my spreadsheets, my budgets, the way I'd count every penny. She'd say it lovingly, laughing, but there was always this tiny edge behind her smile, like she couldn't decide if she admired me or pitied me. Grace and I were close once. We grew up sharing a tiny room, fighting over everything from dresses to diary space. She was bold, loud, and full of color, the kind of person who made everyone turn when she walked into a room. I was the quiet one, the planner, the responsible sister. She lived in chaos. I lived in checklists. After Mom died, that balance between us shifted. We both grieved differently. I folded into silence. She exploded into the world. She moved from one relationship to another, chasing excitement, while I worked, saved, and tried to hold the little family we had left together. So when that message came in, the one that said my balance was dropping, I didn't think of Grace right away. I thought maybe my online bills auto-charged twice. Maybe it was fraud. I didn't think it could be her, but deep down something in me knew. I opened the banking app, my fingers trembling slightly. And there it was. Transfers, withdrawals, all small enough to look harmless. But together they were carving pieces out of my life's work. A part of me wanted to deny it, to believe it was a stranger, not someone who knew my passwords, my patterns, my security questions. But then I saw the name on one of the transfers, Grace Allen. I remember whispering it out loud as if saying her name could somehow make it less real. It didn't. That night, I sat in my living room with the lights off. The glow from the TV played across the walls, but I wasn't watching. I was staring at the reflection of my own face in the black glass of the window. I looked tired, older, like someone who'd been foolish enough to believe blood was a kind of insurance against betrayal. It wasn't the money itself that broke me, not at first. It was what it meant. That she'd looked at everything I'd built, the account I'd started when I was 22, the one I'd quietly named Hope Fund, and decided she had a right to it. I remembered all the times she'd called me, crying, asking for help. And I'd helped her, rent, bills, emergencies, even when I knew she'd probably spend it on something else. Because that's what sisters do, right? We forgive, we protect, we try to believe the best. But this time felt different. This wasn't a plea for help. This was theft. The next morning, I didn't call her. I went to work like normal, or at least I tried to. The office felt smaller that day. The sound of keyboards, the smell of coffee, the hum of air conditioning, everything grated against me. I couldn't focus on spreadsheets or emails. My brain kept looping back to one question. Why would she do this? When I got home, I found her car parked outside my house. My heart dropped. Grace never came by unannounced, not since she'd moved across town. I almost didn't open the door. But curiosity or maybe anger pushed me. She was standing there, smiling like nothing had happened. A new handbag dangled from her wrist, the kind of designer brand she could never normally afford. "Hey, sis!" she chirped. I was in the area. Thought I'd drop by. I forced a smile, but my jaw was tight. "Come in," I said, stepping aside. She plopped down on my couch, kicked off her shoes, and sighed dramatically. God, I'm exhausted. You got coffee? I stood there watching her, watching the way she moved, carefree, glowing. And all I could think about was my savings vanishing line by line on that screen. "Grace," I said finally, my voice low, steady. "I got a notification from my bank today." She froze for a split second, barely noticeable, but enough. Then she laughed. "Oh, what happened? Another one of your perfect numbers not adding up?" My chest tightened. "You used my account." The smile faded from her face. "What are you talking about?" I stepped closer. "Don't lie to me, Grace. I saw your name." Her lips parted, but no sound came. For a moment, her eyes flicked toward the floor, and that was all I needed to know. It's strange how betrayal feels. It doesn't come as fire or fury. It comes as silence, heavy, suffocating silence that wraps around your ribs until you can't breathe. She started talking fast then, excuses, half apologies, words that meant nothing. "I was desperate," she said. "I was going to put it back, I swear. But all I heard was you took something that wasn't yours." And in that moment, I realized something else too. She didn't feel sorry for what she did. She felt sorry she got caught. That night, I didn't cry, not yet. I just sat at the table long after she left, staring at the empty chair where she'd been. The house was quiet except for the soft ticking of the clock. And for the first time in my life, I didn't know whether I wanted my sister back or wanted her gone for good. Before everything fell apart, my life had been simple, maybe even boring to some people, but I liked it that way. I woke up every morning at 6:30, brewed a cup of hazelnut coffee, and watched the sunrise spill across the small patch of my backyard. It was my ritual, quiet, predictable, and peaceful. I worked as an office manager at a small architecture firm. The job wasn't glamorous, but it gave me a sense of control. I liked numbers, routines, and order, things that didn't lie. My coworkers used to joke that I was the glue that held the chaos together. I'd smile and shrug, but deep down, I took pride in that. And Grace was chaos herself. She was 2 years younger than me, but had always felt decades younger in spirit, carefree, impulsive, sometimes careless. She'd bounce from job to job, relationship to relationship, always chasing something new, something exciting. When she'd call me crying after another breakup or another failed plan, I'd always be there. It became a pattern. Grace made the mess. I cleaned it up. I didn't resent it, not at first. I thought that's what sisters did. I remember when I first started saving. I was 22, living in a one-bedroom apartment, eating instant noodles and budgeting down to the last dollar. Mom had taught me the value of saving. She used to say, "Money won't buy happiness, Monica, but it can keep the wolves from your door." She was right. That secret account started as a little side fund, emergency savings, I told myself. But over time it became something else. A symbol of independence, of security, of self-worth. I never talked about it because it wasn't just money. It was every missed vacation, every new dress I didn't buy, every extra shift I worked. When Grace found out I was saving, she called me stingy. When I bought her groceries during her hard times, she'd laugh and say, "See? You're good for something after all." It stung, but I let it slide. That's the thing about love, especially family love. You ignore small bruises until they become scars. After Mom passed away, things got heavier. Grace couldn't handle the grief. She started spending recklessly, drinking more, chasing things that numbed her. Meanwhile, I buried myself in work. I kept busy paying bills, organizing her messes, arranging Mom's estate. There was one night, about 6 months after the funeral, that I still remember clearly. Grace showed up at my apartment door in tears. Her boyfriend had kicked her out. She had nowhere to go. I let her stay, not for a night, but for nearly a year. At first, it felt nice. Like the old days. We'd cook together, watch TV, even laugh sometimes. But gradually, her chaos returned. Bills went unpaid. She borrowed money that never came back. And every time I confronted her, she'd turn it around, make me feel guilty for having more, for being too uptight, for not understanding what it meant to live freely. She had this way of twisting words until I didn't even recognize what I was fighting for anymore. So I stopped fighting. It was easier to let her win. When she finally moved out, I thought it was a blessing. She said she'd found a new place with a friend. I helped her pack, even drove her across town. Before she left, she hugged me tight and whispered, "You're my rock, Monica. I don't know what I'd do without you." It was such a simple line, but it melted me. Even after everything, I believed her. If I'd known what was coming, I might have been stronger. But back then, I still thought love and forgiveness could fix anything. Life after she moved out felt calm again. I'd wake up, check my account, smile at the steady growth. I wasn't rich, but I was secure. My plan was simple. Retire early, maybe buy a small cottage somewhere quiet, somewhere with a garden and a view. Every time I deposited a bit more into that account, I felt closer to freedom. That's why I named it Hope Fund. I used to imagine Mom smiling at me for being so careful. She always said I had an old soul. But Grace, she never understood that. She thought living carefully meant living scared. And maybe in some ways she was right. Because no matter how carefully I planned, I never planned for her to betray me. The weekend before I discovered the missing money, Grace had come over for dinner. She brought wine, joked about her new job, and asked me questions, too many questions now that I think about it. How much do you have saved, Monica? Do you ever think of investing? What's your online banking like? Do you still use that old app? At the time, I laughed it off. She'd always been curious about my money brain. She said she admired how I managed things. But I noticed something different that night. Her compliments had an edge, like she wasn't admiring me, she was studying me. She even offered to help me digitize some of my finances. Said she'd read about new security updates and could help me reset some things. I remember smiling, pouring another glass of wine, and saying, "You're finally learning responsibility, huh?" She laughed. But it wasn't the kind of laugh that reached her eyes. Looking back now, that dinner feels like the beginning of the end. The night she smiled at me across the table. The night she probably memorized my every move. I didn't see it then, the calculation behind her charm. Because when you love someone, you don't look for betrayal. You look for reasons to trust. And that's exactly how they get you. The first sign that something was wrong came quietly. Too quietly for me to notice at first. It started with a small email from my bank. Unusual activity detected on your account. I remember reading it half awake one morning, sitting at the kitchen counter with a slice of toast in my hand. I frowned, clicked on it, and saw a withdrawal I didn't remember making. 500 gone. It wasn't huge, but it wasn't small either. At first, I told myself it was probably a mistake. Maybe my automatic bill payment had processed twice. I'd sort it out later. But that later turned into 3 weeks. I was busy at work, handling a new project. Grace was calling me almost every other day, chatting, laughing, asking if I wanted to go shopping or do something spontaneous for once. Everything seemed fine. Normal, even. Then came the second email. And this one hit harder. Withdrawal 3,500 location out of state. My chest went cold. I immediately logged into my account, hands shaking slightly. The balance was lower, much lower than it should have been. I scrolled through the transactions, heart pounding. There were multiple withdrawals, not all at once, but spread over several weeks. $200 here, $500 there, then $1,000. All from ATMs or transfers I didn't recognize. And worst of all, the account was no longer Hope Fund. It had been renamed. Grace's freedom. For a few seconds, my mind couldn't process what I was seeing. I thought maybe it was a glitch. Maybe someone hacked my account and changed the display name. That had to be it. But when I looked closer, I saw it. My sister's email address listed under authorized secondary user. My stomach dropped. I froze in my chair, staring at the screen, trying to remember when that could have happened. Then it hit me. That night, the dinner, the wine, when Grace offered to help me update my banking app. She'd asked for my phone to check the new security settings. I remember handing it over without a second thought. God, I even thanked her for being so tech-savvy. That entire day at work, I couldn't focus. My head was buzzing. A part of me wanted to believe it was some misunderstanding. Maybe she'd accessed the account accidentally. Maybe she was in trouble. Grace always was in trouble. But deep down, something inside me had already cracked. That night I called her. She didn't pick up. I called again. And again, no answer. By the 5th call, she finally texted back, "Hey sis, I'm with friends. Can I call you tomorrow? Everything okay?" I stared at the message for a long time before replying. "We need to talk, urgently." She never responded that night. The next morning, she showed up at my apartment bright and smiling like nothing was wrong. She had a coffee in her hand and that same teasing grin she always wore. "Money, you look stressed. What's going on?" I didn't even invite her in. I just held up my phone and said, "You tell me." Her smile flickered for a second, barely noticeable, but I caught it. "What's this about?" she said, tilting her head. I turned the screen toward her, the account balance, the withdrawals, her name attached. "Grace, why is your email connected to my savings account?" She blinked, then laughed. "Are you serious?" "Oh my God, Monica, you're so paranoid. I helped you set that up, remember?" Maybe it auto-linked. I didn't laugh. "Did you take money from me?" I asked quietly. Her expression hardened. Just for a moment. Then she softened her voice. "Monica, I needed help. I was going to tell you, I just didn't know how." Her words hit like a hammer. I felt something inside me splinter. Not rage, not sadness, just this heavy numbness. "How much?" I whispered. She hesitated. And that hesitation told me everything. We sat in silence for a long moment. The ticking clock in the living room was the only sound between us. Finally, she sighed and said, "You wouldn't have given it to me if I asked. You're always so controlling with money. I just needed a little to get back on my feet. I was going to pay you back. A little," I said, almost laughing. "You took everything, Grace, my entire savings." Her jaw clenched. "You don't understand what it's like to struggle." "Struggle?" I repeated, my voice shaking. "I've been struggling my whole life, working, saving, helping you every time you fell apart. And now you've taken the one thing that was mine. She crossed her arms, defensive. It's just money, Monica. You act like I stole your soul. I stared at her, feeling something inside me turn cold. It was my soul. She stormed out that day, muttering about how I was being dramatic, how family shouldn't count pennies. I didn't chase her. For the first time, I didn't try to fix it. But that night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying her words, her expression, that small smirk when I confronted her. It wasn't guilt, it was defiance. She didn't regret what she'd done. She only regretted being caught. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the open bank portal. My hope fund, the one I'd built for 20 years, was gone. But the part that broke me most wasn't the money. It was the realization that the person I'd trusted most in the world had seen my sacrifice, my discipline, my care, and decided it was hers to take. That's when I made a quiet promise to myself. I wouldn't yell, I wouldn't beg, but I would make her see what she'd done. I didn't know how yet, but I knew this. Grace wasn't going to walk away from this pretending she'd won. The days after our confrontation felt like walking through fog. Everything around me looked the same. My living room, my morning coffee, the sound of the mail slot clicking, but it felt different. Like something invisible had been taken from me, something I couldn't get back. Grace stopped calling. No text, no apologies. Just silence. At first, I told myself she was ashamed. That maybe she'd come around once she realized what she'd done. But shame requires conscience, and I was starting to accept that Grace didn't carry much of that anymore. Then, one afternoon, I got a phone call that shattered the last piece of denial I had left. It was from my old friend Karen, who worked at a local real estate office. "Monica," she said, sounding hesitant. "I don't want to meddle, but..." "Is Grace buying a house?" I froze. "What did you say?" "She came in last week," Karen continued. "Said she was interested in one of the properties near Brookside. She mentioned having a down payment ready. Said you two were going into it together." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. A down payment. That was what I had been saving for all those years. A small home, something of my own before retirement. And Grace, she had taken that dream and turned it into her opportunity. I thanked Karen, trying to keep my voice steady, and hung up. My hands were trembling so badly I nearly dropped the phone. That night, I drove to Grace's apartment. It was a modest place, one I'd helped her move into 2 years ago when she said she needed a fresh start. I sat in the car for almost 10 minutes, staring up at the lit window. A part of me wanted to just leave. What was the point? The damage was done. But another part, the part that had raised Grace after our mother died, the part that had bailed her out of debts and heartbreaks, couldn't walk away. I needed to see her face when she lied again. When she opened the door, she looked surprised. "Oh, Monica," her tone was flat, cautious. "You shouldn't just show up like this." "I wouldn't have to if you answered your phone," I said quietly. She sighed and crossed her arms. "What now?" "I know about the house," I said. Her eyes flickered, just for a second, that tiny, betraying twitch. Then she smiled, pretending to be confused. "What house?" "The one near Brookside. The one you're using my money to buy." Her smile faded. "Who told you that?" "Does it matter?" We stood there, staring at each other, two women who shared blood but no longer shared trust. Finally, she said, "You weren't using it, Monica. You've been saving forever, living so tight, so afraid to live. I thought maybe it was time one of us did something with it." I almost laughed. "You stole my life savings and decided that you deserved to live with it?" She shrugged. "You always said you wanted family to be happy." I felt my chest tighten, not from anger this time, but from something deeper, heavier. "I wanted us to build happiness, Grace, not steal it." She looked away, jaw clenched. "You make everything sound so dramatic." "I'll pay you back." "With what?" I asked softly. "My own money?" The silence between us grew sharp. I could hear the faint hum of her fridge, the ticking of a wall clock, my own heartbeat in my ears. Finally, she spoke again, quieter this time, but with that same defensiveness that had poisoned our bond for years. "You've always looked down on me. Ever since we were kids. You think just because you kept things together, you're better than me." I shook my head. "No, Grace. I just kept things together because you never did." Her eyes flashed. "You act like I owe you my life." "Maybe not your life," I said, my voice trembling now, "but at least your honesty." She didn't answer. I took a deep breath, forcing the words out before my courage broke. You've taken more than money from me. You've taken my peace. And I can't let that slide anymore. I turned to leave, but she called after me. So what? You gonna report me? Turn your own sister in? I stopped at the door and looked back. No, Grace, I'm going to move on. Without you. That night I cried. Not the loud, angry kind of crying, but the quiet, exhausted kind. The kind that comes from years of trying to hold things together alone. I deleted her number from my phone. I unfollowed her on social media. And I started over. It wasn't easy. The first few weeks felt empty, like I'd lost a limb I'd always leaned on. But slowly, something new began to grow in that empty space. Peace. I took long walks in the evenings. I cooked for myself again, really tasting the food. I even joined a small community writing group, something I'd always wanted to do but never had time for. And every time I sat down to write, I realized something profound. I wasn't angry anymore. I was free. Months later, I heard through mutual friends that Grace had lost the house. Apparently, she couldn't keep up with the payments. She'd tried blaming the bank, the market, everyone but herself. I didn't gloat. I didn't call her. I just whispered a quiet goodbye to the version of her I'd been trying to save all my life. Sometimes late at night, I still catch myself wondering if she ever thinks about what she did. If she ever feels that sting of regret when she sees my number and doesn't call. But then I remind myself, forgiveness isn't about waiting for an apology. It's about reclaiming your power, and that's what I did. Because sometimes the greatest revenge isn't anger. It's peace. It's been almost a year since that night. The night I walked away from Grace's door and left behind more than just a broken sisterhood. I left behind the version of myself that thought love meant sacrifice, that forgiveness meant silence, and that family meant loyalty no matter the cost. I used to believe that being the good sister meant fixing everything, cleaning up her messes, paying her debts, calming her storms. But I've learned something life-changing. Sometimes love means letting go before it destroys you. The first few months were hard. Every time I opened my banking app, my chest tightened. Not because of the money, but because it reminded me of how deeply I'd trusted her. I'd scroll through old photos of us, birthdays, road trips, Christmas mornings, Grace laughing with that carefree grin that always made people fall for her charm. And me standing beside her, smiling too, never realizing how much of myself I'd poured into her happiness. One afternoon, while cleaning out my closet, I found an old wooden box I hadn't opened in years. Inside were letters, ones Grace and I had written to each other when she first moved out on her own. The first one was full of hope. She'd written, "I'll make you proud, Monica. I promise I'll pay you back for every favor someday." I sat on the floor and cried, not because of the broken promise, but because I realized that version of her did love me once. She just got lost somewhere along the way. And maybe I did too. After that day, I made a decision. I wasn't going to let that betrayal define me. So I took control of my life again. I started budgeting, setting new goals, even meeting with a financial advisor to rebuild what I'd lost. At first, it felt humiliating, admitting I'd been so naive. But my advisor, a kind older man named Mr. Bennett, said something that stuck with me. People who love deeply also trust deeply. Don't let one betrayal make you hard, Monica. Just make it make you wiser. And that's exactly what I did. Around springtime, I joined a small writing circle at the local library, a mix of retired teachers, young mothers, and a few quiet men who came mostly to listen. We met every Thursday evening. At first, I didn't talk much. But one night, when it was my turn to share, I decided to read something personal, a story about betrayal, forgiveness, and family. When I finished, the room was silent for a long moment. Then an older woman across the table whispered, "That happened to me too." And just like that, something in me healed. Because for the first time, I realized I wasn't alone. Pain has a way of isolating you, making you think you're the only one who's ever felt that kind of heartbreak. But once you speak it aloud, it loses its power. Summer came, and with it, a sense of peace I hadn't felt in years. I redecorated my home, not a full renovation, just small touches that made it mine again. New curtains, fresh paint, a soft rug in the living room. One afternoon, I sat on the couch with a cup of tea, sunlight filtering through the blinds, and I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the window. I looked calm, older maybe, but softer. For so long, I'd carried my pain like armor, thinking if I stayed guarded, I'd never be hurt again. But peace doesn't come from walls. It comes from boundaries. And now I had both. One evening, I got a call from an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something told me to. Monica? It was Grace. Her voice sounded small, thinner than I remembered. She told me she'd been through a rough few months. The house was gone. Her new business had failed. She'd been staying with a friend, trying to get back on her feet. I listened quietly. For a long time, she didn't mention the money. Then finally, she said, "I'm sorry." Just those 2 words. No excuses. No manipulation. Just sorry. I closed my eyes. A year ago, I would have wept. Or screamed. Or begged for an explanation. But that night, I simply said, "I know." And then I told her something that surprised even me. "I forgive you, Grace, but I can't go back to the way things were." She didn't argue. She just whispered, "I understand," and hung up. When the call ended, I sat there for a long time, staring at my hands. I thought forgiveness would feel like unlocking a door, like letting her back in. But it didn't. It felt like setting myself free. These days, I still think about her sometimes. Not with anger, not even sadness, just understanding. Some people are lessons, not lifetimes. And sometimes the ones who hurt you the most are the ones who teach you what you deserve. A few months later, my writing circle encouraged me to submit my short story to a local magazine. It got published. The editor said my story touched something universal. That made me smile. Because if there's one thing I've learned, it's that pain doesn't make you weaker. It makes you relatable. And healing makes you unstoppable. Now, whenever I sit on my porch at sunset, I watch the light fall across the yard, golden and calm. I think about everything I lost and everything I gained. And I realize that sometimes life doesn't give you justice. It gives you growth. Grace taught me that trust should be earned, not assumed. And I taught myself that love, real love, includes me too. Maybe someday she'll rebuild her life. Maybe she won't, but as for me, I've already started mine. Sometimes I still get questions from people who knew us both. They ask if Grace and I ever made peace, if sisters should ever really stay apart. And I always tell them the truth. Peace doesn't always mean reunion. Forgiveness isn't about pretending nothing happened. It's about saying, "I remember, but I choose not to carry it anymore." Because carrying pain is heavy, child. It bends your back and clouds your joy until you forget what light even feels like. When I let go of the bitterness, I thought I was losing something, but really, I was gaining myself. For the first time in my life, I didn't need to be anyone's savior. I didn't need to fix, prove, or please. I just needed to be, and in that stillness, I found peace. If I've learned anything, it's this. Sometimes the people we love will hurt us in ways we never imagined. They'll take our trust, our money, our faith, and leave us wondering if love was ever real. But love was real. It just wasn't enough to save them from themselves. And that's not your fault. You can't heal someone who chooses to stay broken. But you can heal yourself, one honest moment at a time. I look back at my sister now and see not a villain, but a warning. A reminder of what happens when envy goes unchecked and when gratitude dies too young. And I also see my own reflection. A woman who learned that boundaries don't make you cruel, they make you whole. So tonight, as you listen to my story, maybe with your cup of tea, maybe alone in a quiet room, I want you to think about the people in your own life. Who are you protecting at the cost of your own peace? Who keeps taking from you, promising to change, but never does? And if you had to choose between keeping them or keeping yourself, who would you choose? Because that's the real lesson of my story. It's not about money. It's not even about betrayal. It's about self-worth. About realizing that the moment you start saving everyone else, you risk losing the one person you were supposed to protect all along. You. Thank you for listening to my story. And if it touched you even just a little, don't forget to share it, subscribe, and tell me in the comments, would you have forgiven her too?